So today we have another interview with the devs of the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy, where they talk a little bit more about the accolades that Rebirth has been receiving this award season, player response to returning characters like Cissnei and Zack, the much awaited PC port of Rebirth, which looks gorgeous, and they also touch a little bit on Remake Part 3, so if any of that sounds cool to you, feel free to click the like button, and if you're new here and you'd like to stick around and help support the channel, you can subscribe, and as always, leave your thoughts in the comments down below. So this interview comes to us from Game Rant, where they got to sit down with Yoshinori Kitase and Naoki Hamaguchi at the Game Awards. And this year's event was really well done. Great announcements and surprises. It was well paced, surprisingly self-aware, and some of the announcements that happened at the event caught my eye and I had to make videos on them, including the inclusion of Clive in Tekken 8. He looks like he's gonna be so much fun to play. It looks insane. And then I also covered the return of another franchise that I am a big fan of, and that is the Onimusha series, with the return of Onimusha Way of the Sword. So in that video, I talk a little bit more about the story and we break down some of the combat stuff. So if you guys could check those videos out, I would greatly appreciate it. I know it's not Final Fantasy proper, and a majority of the people that come to my channel really just want Final Fantasy news, especially Final Fantasy VII, but I have other things that I'm passionate about as well. So if you guys could show those videos some love, I would greatly appreciate it. So I'll leave links in the description as well as in this video to those two videos in particular. So starting off first, they ask the developers about some of the accolades that Rebirth has been getting. Hamaguchi responds by saying, with the offline version being released and receiving over 90 points on the Metacritic score, it felt like quite a feat that we haven't reached in a while. In terms of when we first released Rebirth, we were very confident in the quality of the game. It's been about 8 months since the release and we are entering this award season. We've been seeing a lot of nominations and wins even, and it feels like we've been sort of appreciated or given this sort of acclaim for what we have done throughout this year. It makes us very proud and it's a very happy feeling. I'm proud too. You know, again, I've mentioned this before, but just seeing the recognition that Rebirth and the developers and the cast have been getting this entire award season is so lovely. I'm a big fan of all these people. They put in some really great work into Remake and Rebirth. Rebirth, I think, is one of the best games I've played in a very, very long time. Such a special game. And to see it win at things like the Golden Joystick Awards, the PlayStation Partner Awards, it won Best Music at the Game Awards, which is pretty cool. And although it didn't take home Game of the Year, which is a bit of a bummer because I think that game is so damn good, the exposure that they've received in return is a massive win in and of itself. Having all of these nominations, being a part of an award show that is watched by millions upon millions of people every single year really boosts the profile of Rebirth to the point where now more people know about it and are willing to go out and actually try it. And with the inclusion of the PC version, that's going to get even more people on board. So as cool as it would have been to see the game get the cherry on top and get that Game of the Year, that would eventually go to Astrobot, which again, I can't really be mad at Astrobot winning because it is a phenomenal game. And from beginning to end, I had a smile on my face while I was playing that game as well, but I do think that Rebirth, in my opinion, is the better game. But either way, I think a lot more people are going to know about Rebirth now after this award season, which is great. Up next, they asked the developers if they were nervous about fan feedback from any specific part of the game or returning characters. Hamaguchi responds by saying, I think the most recognizable would be Cissnei from the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, appearing in the game. Those who are familiar with the universe might be very excited to see her showing up. When the game was released and I saw the players' reactions, I was really glad to see that people were actually excited to see her. And I actually was really excited to see Cissnei. Now, Cissnei comes from the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, which is a bit of a mess. But Cissnei, I think, was one of the bright spots of that compilation. Her as a character, being someone who works as a Turk, who works for Shinra, but has a conscience and is conflicted between working for the company, but also helping out friends like Zack. And at the end of Crisis Core, when she chooses to let Zack and Cloud escape and then she doesn't tell Shinra, that's a really big character moment for her. So to see her come back in Rebirth and be in Gongaga, watching over Zack's family, watching over his home, it really just goes to show how much Zack affected her to her core, her crisis core. if you will. And I really do hope that she makes another appearance in part 3. It would be really cool to kind of put a little bow on her story when it comes to her learning about Zack and what actually happened to him. So maybe once Cloud gets his mind right, he can return to Gongaga and let Cissnei know what happened. Or maybe since Zack is now probably in the same world as our party, he could travel to Gongaga and see his parents and see Cissnei and really kind of clear the air on what happened. Now up next, they talk about the big elephant in the room, spoilers, and that is the death of Aerith. And we've covered Aerith's death and how it's depicted ad nauseum on this channel, but I do think the way that Kitase explains it in this interview might be the clearest way they've ever talked about it, so I do want to touch on that. Kitase says, "We have this sort of understanding that some people already know what happens in the original story, so with that understanding, we had to approach the way we depicted this loss of Aerith in a different way in Rebirth. With the original Final Fantasy VII, Aerith was sort of suddenly taken away from us, and we kind of lean into that sort of sudden feeling of loss. Whereas in this iteration, we tried to approach it with the mindset of we can't really grasp that this is actually happening, like the reality hasn't hit yet. I think that's how Cloud probably felt, and probably how the players felt. So that was the kind of thinking that went into that sort of depiction of Aerith's fate." Which I really do appreciate how they've approached the story stuff in the Remake trilogy. Obviously, we all know that the big story points are going to be there, but they've really kind of changed up how we approach those story points, the routes that we take, the detours, the new characters that we meet. So you do kind of have to change up some of these things. Otherwise, we already know it's going to come and we already know how to react to it. But with Aerith's death in particular, it's so jarring, it's so confusing, but it makes sense from a story standpoint, because everything we learn in Remake and Rebirth, we're learning through the eyes of Cloud, and we know Cloud to not be a very reliable narrator. So while Cloud is dealing with all of his issues, the way that he's seeing the death of Aerith is going to be jarring, because on one hand, he cannot accept that she's gonna die, and he's already struggling with his memories and who he is as a person. And that also kind of lines up a little bit with grief. Sometimes when you lose someone, you can't acknowledge that they're gone, or that you don't want to acknowledge that they're gone. So Cloud is still very much going through the stage of grief in that ending. And then by the time we get to the actual ending of the game, he's in full-on denial with that hallucination of Aerith, which some moments might be real Aerith, some moments might be a Jenova manipulation, or Jenova just taking the shape of Aerith to try and manipulate Cloud even further. And that's really just one thing about this trilogy that I love so much, is how they're handling Cloud, and how us as the player, we're learning information through Cloud's eyes. So it kind of makes us also question, like, is what Cloud's seeing real? Because I know what happens in the original game, but now it just makes you question everything. And it makes me even more excited for part 3, because it's like, well, what the heck is going to happen in there? Up next, they ask the developers about incorporating Zack, giving him a bigger role, and why they did that. Hamaguchi would say, "Of course, with the Remake project being a trilogy, we are expecting a time span of perhaps around 10 years. We want to make sure that we are also continuing to engage with our players, making sure that we are incorporating elements that are familiar and introducing elements that are something that the players would look forward to that's within the world of the 7 universe. We mentioned Cissnei earlier, and then Zack was another one. We looked for characters or settings that are familiar to those who know the series and are something that can reach them easily through our Remake titles. With that in mind, our overall vision across Remake, Rebirth, and of course, the 3rd installment is to continue bringing that sort of excitement and a sense of surprise, and while doing so, incorporating the different elements that are spread out through our 7 brand." So Zack was there not only to kind of get players more familiar and comfortable with this idea of this 7 Remake trilogy, but I also think he does act as a hook, because when we get to the end of Remake and we see that ending sequence with Zack and the soldiers, we're like, oh no, we're gonna relive that again, but also, what? We're gonna see this now? What the heck is going on? And then Zack ends up surviving, and he beats the soldiers, and he takes off for Midgar with Cloud. And that's one of our biggest cliffhangers in Remake, which prepares us for Rebirth. So now we're like, okay, what's Zack gonna do in Rebirth? And as things unfold in Rebirth, Zack trying to protect and take care of Aerith and Cloud, meeting up with Biggs to eventually help Cloud fight off Sephiroth that leads into another massive hook for part 3, because what is Zack going to do now in part 3? But it also begs the question of who else is going to show up? Could we potentially see people like Matt and Lucia from Ever Crisis, because they're technically a part of the Avalanche unit? Will characters like Genesis pop up? So again, we talked earlier about Cissnei and how she was originally from the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, and I truly do think that the way that they're implementing elements of the compilation into the remake trilogy is really well done. Because when we first saw that trailer for Intermission, and we saw Deep Ground, and we saw Weiss, a lot of us fans had the same reaction of, oh no, they're bringing in stuff from the compilation, this is not good, I'm kind of worried, what's gonna happen? Mom, I'm scared, please come pick me up. But after playing through Intermission and playing through Rebirth and even experiencing 7 Remake, the elements of the compilation that they do decide to include are included really well and incorporated really well, in my opinion. Having Weiss be a VR battle, having Deep Ground be the people that Yuffie and Sonon fight, bringing back somebody like Cissnei. It's all so well done, and I think a lot of that comes down to the writing. Nojima-san is just kind of like, he's got a golden finger, golden pen right now, and whatever he writes just kind of comes out really well compared to the compilation, which was kind of messy in terms of its writing. And we've talked about before about how Nojima might see this as a bit of a second chance to kind of right some of the wrongs from the compilation and even the original FF7, and it looks like he's doing that. And we'll have to wait and see if any more elements of Advent Children in particular creep their way back into Remake Part 3. Up next, they talk about Remake Part 3, and they just straight up ask the developers, do you guys know how it all ends? Hamaguchi says, for sure, we do have this sort of goal of where it all lands with the conclusion of the trilogy. In that sense, we do know how it will all end, and right now we are trying to get that delivered to our players and trying to build all the details that go into that package. And if everything continues on schedule, we should hopefully be getting Part 3 sometime in 2027 to celebrate that 30th anniversary of the original Final Fantasy VII. And we also do know that the scenario has been fully completed. The devs are working on everything right now as we speak. Of course, they're probably going to take a break for the holidays and then get right back to it, but it's exciting to know that they know, yeah, we know the ending, we know where it's headed, now we just got to actually produce it. Up next, they ask the devs, is there a specific moment from Part 3 that they're most excited to bring to players? Hamaguchi says, with Remake and then Rebirth, we're hoping that the players have seen the evolution of Final Fantasy VII, with Remake being more story-driven and then Rebirth having that sort of open field where you can traverse freely. Then we are interested in producing the Highwind, so in the third title, we're hoping that it will allow for an even more expansive map and players will be able to experience that. And of course, in Part 3, we're going to get access most likely to the entire planet. It's not like Rebirth where we only got a section of the planet to explore that was, kind of pertaining to that specific part of the story. Now everything's going to be open and unlocked. We're going to traverse on foot, on Chocobo, by Highwind. The mechanics for the Highwind are going to be probably super cool, and I cannot wait to see what they do with that, especially if they incorporate sky battles and let us do battle with Shinra ships in the sky. I really want to know what combat's going to be like if they do end up doing that. And I did see some people in my comments showing some concern over the Highwind. They weren't really quite sure why people were so excited to get the Highwind, because they feel like it might be something that's cumbersome or it might get in the way, and why would we use the Highwind if we have fast travel? And the easiest answer is just flexibility, giving players options. I'm sure in Part 3 there'll be situations where you don't have to use the Highwind, you can just fast travel to a location, but some players might want to go with the Highwind. Some players might want to go there on a Chocobo. And then of course there are going to be areas that we will not be able to reach without the Highwind. That's how it was in the original game, and I'm sure that's how they'll do it in Part 3. And we talked before about how on earth do you find a way to land a ship like the Highwind in some of these regions. And with the newer regions they're developing in Part 3, I'm pretty sure they're being built with the Highwind in mind. And when I say that, I mean that they're going to make those zones large enough to accommodate a ship like the Highwind if we choose to actually land it. But of course, the easiest solution is just have a ladder drop from the Highwind, our characters slide on down, and then they're free to run around the terrain. So how they do all this stuff, I don't know, but it's going to be pretty cool. Up next, they ask the developers, is the PC version of Rebirth going to be the definitive way to experience this game? Hamaguchi says, in terms of the graphic fidelity and the quality that we're offering, the PC version is definitely improved compared to the PlayStation version. Specifically, the lighting processes have been reassessed overall, so we are confident that the way the characters are set in the different scenes, as well as the modeling of the textures, have been improved since the PlayStation version. We are hopeful that the PC version of Rebirth will be of a graphical quality you can only experience on PC. They then go on to ask Hamaguchi, how does the PC version compare to the PS5 Pro version? He would say, if we're looking at a high-end PC, I think it's higher quality in terms of the graphical fidelity. Of course, with the higher end, we had these different offerings. We also have graphical settings where people can configure the options, but at the same time, we do want to reach as many PC players as possible. We're, of course, accommodating and optimizing for people who may not have as high-end of a PC, and we're also striving to be fully functional on the Steam Deck as well. And visually, yeah, the PC version looks incredible. Seeing it from the trailer, seeing the screenshots that Square Enix has provided, the character models look so much more detailed. The environments and the lighting in particular, like they point out, look really good. And that was one of the big issues I had with Rebirth on the console, and a lot of other people did too, was the lighting. Lighting outdoors really just looked kind of washed out in some areas, and it was really super bright. I think everyone has that moment in Rebirth where you leave a cave or a building and then you go outside and you're just immediately blinded by the light, like Bahamut is about to hit you with Mega Flare. It's like the exposure has just been turned way up. And you don't really see that so far in the PC version. It really looks like they've got that lighting dialed in. The character models, of course, are better, but also the textures. Rebirth on console did have a lot of issue with texture pop-ins, and that's really just an Unreal Engine thing that trying to figure out that for the console side of things is probably going to be really difficult to do because there are still those hardware limitations. Although the Pro at times really does seem to clean up the textures of Rebirth as well. It's not just the character models and the resolution. Some of those textures actually do look much better. And while PC and console are two completely different beasts, I really do hope that the experience the developers had making Rebirth on the PS5, because again, you have to keep in mind, this is their first full PlayStation 5 game that has a massive open zone, open world kind of situation. They did do intermission, but that was a small piece of DLC. Now, this is their first fully fledged game on the PS5, and I hope that they take the experience of making the game on console as well as the experience of porting it to PC, and I hope they can use that going forward for part 3 to make sure that it looks and performs the best that it possibly can on the console side of things. And we'll end the video with the final words from Hamaguchi and Kitase to the fans. Hamaguchi says, in terms of FF7 Rebirth, we first released it on the PS5. When we first released it, many players and fans out there were clamoring for the PC version as soon as possible. We're very excited that we're finally able to have players experience Rebirth, not just on the PlayStation, so I'm very happy and excited to deliver this to our waiting fans. Kitase says, touching on what Hamaguchi-san said, we do want to have as many people as possible playing Rebirth. We're hoping that with this PC version release, we can gain momentum, and we can continue the momentum until the conclusion of the trilogy. We're hoping to carry those feelings that the players would have through until the conclusion. And the PC version is definitely gaining momentum. As of right now on the Steam sales charts, it's hovering between top 15 and top 10. So clearly there's a lot of people that are waiting for Rebirth to come out on PC. If you looked at all on social media, whenever Square Enix would post something Final Fantasy related, there was always people in the comments, when's PC? When's PC? When's the game coming to PC? If it's not PC, it's when's Xbox? When's it coming to Xbox? So clearly there's a large chunk of the audience that is waiting to play this game on PC. And again, looking at those Steam sales charts, I think the game is going to perform really, really well on PC, and I really do hope that that momentum carries them through into part 3, so that way when part 3 comes around, more people will be excited, more people will know about it, and that game will hopefully eventually do better. So with that being said, that is the video. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys thought about anything that we covered today. Specifically, were you one of those people waiting for the PC release of Rebirth before you got your hands on the game and sat down to play it? Let me know down below. I am Curious Corduroy. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.